September 1972, the Munich Olympic Games.
The Olympic Council of Ireland has always seen itself as representing the island rather than the state. It's been a contentious issue, especially in sports such as track and field and cycling. But in the boxing ring, there's never been any doubt. From the day the IABA was founded, amateur boxing in Ireland has been resolutely a 32-county sport. Ireland's six-man boxing team that travelled to Munich in 1972 was made up of 3 fighters from the south and 3 from the north.
I see 2 more just arrived here, and let's move down a little bit here. And it's the 2 boys from Derry. Charlie Nash, how are you, Charlie?
How do you know?
And Neil McLaughlin, how are things?
Yeah. Oh, going pretty well, you know.
You always seem to me the coolest of all the boxers. Are you as cool as ever?
Well, I hope so. I don't know until I get in the ring, you know.
The Munich Olympics 1972 brought the whole issue of sports and politics onto a global stage. 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were kidnapped and then killed by Palestinian gunmen as the sound of gunfire resounded around the Olympic Village. For Ireland's boxers, especially those from the north, it was a grim reminder of home.
I remember when the shooting was going on, our lads were able to sit there and they were sitting in the middle of the square listening, and they were able to say right away, you know, that's SLRs, that's not starting pistols, and they knew. And it was sad, very sad.
The resumption of the Troubles in 1969 brought a sudden end to most sports in Belfast. But the amateur boxers fought on.
Yes, indeed, a clear-cut win for Hugh Russell from Belfast.
Even through the worst of the violence, the IABA managed to maintain the sport as a 32-county entity.
Dave Larmour of Northern Ireland.
Boxers from the north represented Northern Ireland at the Commonwealth Games and then donned an Irish vest to box for Ireland in the internationals.
At the National Stadium, the lightest weight always carried the flag. In those days, I was the flyweight, so I carried the flag. Even though it was a tricolour, it didn't matter to me. I've said before, it could have been the skull and crossbones. I wouldn't give it fiddlers, you know, my flag.
As Belfast became scarred with checkpoints and barbed wire, the boxing clubs that had thrived in the city found themselves on the front line of the sectarian violence.
It was a dangerous place, and there's no doubt about it. This area would have been known as the Murder Mile. There was more murders committed in this area on the Antrim Road and around North Belfast than anywhere else in the province. This club never closed one night from 1969 right through. Every night we were open for the kids, and the kids travelled in here from the Lake of the Shankill Road, from the Tigers Bay, from Gilnahirk. Now they were what you'd call loyalist areas, for by the Republican areas of the New Lodge, West Belfast, and Leggan Ardoyne, they all boxed here.
Oh, Larmour has got it. Well, that's a gold for Northern Ireland.
I came from a loyalist area, Shankill Road. I trained in the Holy Family Boxing Club for donkey's years. I was the Holy Family's flyweight, went away with them every year to Bournemouth, national tournaments. And I'd met loads of guys that probably were in the Republican movement, and never had I got any animosity or any threat towards me. I had some of my hardest fights going back to where I lived than coming over to the New Lodge Road. You expect that, but I got maybe insulted going back. What are you going over there to train for? Everybody knew who I was at the time. It was my sport, and it was what I wanted to do. And if it meant me going to Afghanistan or somewhere, I'd have went to Afghanistan for boxing, you know.
The part that played throughout the Troubles in keeping a lot of kids out of the hands of, say, the paramilitaries at the time and keeping them focused on their own sport, it was something, it was an escape for people, escape for children. It kept them dedicated to a sport that kept going throughout the whole Troubles, while perhaps the world or the society was falling apart outside. And boxing should hold its head up within this city for the role it has played. And, you know, it was a beacon light there throughout the whole time of the Trouble.
That light somehow managed to pervade into the very heart of darkness, as boxing engendered a common cause behind the barbed wire walls of the H blocks.
I was the only one invited up into the prisons in Long Cass to train the paramilitaries on both sides. We had the ARA, we had the Provost, we had the UVF and the UDA and the official ARA. And if they couldn't get me, it wasn't on. Because remember, at that stage they weren't recognising the governor or anybody else in the prisons. And it was just after Bobby Sands had died. I was in one of the compounds and they'd be asking me how the boys would have been doing, how they doing, how the boys getting on. Well, what they meant by how the boys getting on, that was how was the Provost getting on. So I was telling them, look, I'm having problems because I can't get the right stuff, my right gear in to work with them, so I'm having problems with them. And they said to me, Jerry, listen, take our gear down, we'll lend them our gear. Say that was a Monday. As long as you have it back here, and as long as I have it back here for you coming in on Wednesday. You know, so outside, both sides at one another and killing each other on the outside. But on the inside, they were lending their gear to provincials, vice versa. It's marvellous.
Amateur boxing in Dublin at this time saw the emergence of Drimna as a real force.
Well, here we are at the boxing session of the St. John Bosco Boys Club in Sperrin Road, Drimna.
The club's roots went back to the St. John Bosco Centre, set up to look after the youth of an area which had seen a massive housing programme in order to alleviate the overcrowding in Dublin's inner city. Boxing flourished in Drimna, and it didn't hurt that the club coach was one of the great names in Irish boxing, Frankie Kerr.
He was a very mild-mannered, quiet man. He wasn't suave or boastful about his achievements. But yeah, I have found it amazing when we would be out occasionally in the city that so many people seemed to know him and be aware of who he was.
That's it, yeah, good man.
Maybe that came about because of his coaching career, and he had started coaching boxing on the television also in the early days of RTE.
Nothing to it. Now that's how you skip.
It's easy when you know how, isn't it, Frankie?
Sure.
When you learn the right way, in other
Sure,
words.
it's an easy way to do it.
It was fantastic as a young lad to have that situation where your father seemed to be respected, although he didn't encourage me to go into the boxing too much, which was probably wise, very wise on his part in that, you know, I think he saw that I hadn't got the attributes. Maybe I was a bit of a coward from the beginning to make any progress at boxing.
He was throwing a long...
Drimna's fortunes were boosted when Ireland's most successful boxer of the era hung up his gloves.
As I was slipping in there. Be careful or I might lay one on you.
I never really walked away from the sport, and a lot of boxers do, and some come back in time afterwards. But I was straight into it, and I was coaching at Drimna. It was a wonderful club. Had a lot of help there with other coaches as well. But yes, I took over the senior coaching in the club and took over Phil Sutcliffe, who was a very, very good fighter.
Hard-hitting Phil Sutcliffe, the Drimna club in Dublin.
We always fought on the street, like you had to protect yourself, especially when I had 4 brothers at that time. I kind of had to protect them all, you know what I mean, against, we just say rivalry was a thing that everyone kind of, best at football, best at cycling the bikes, best at boxing, you know, you want to do the best.
There's that big right hand from Sutcliffe again. Cork comes back and runs into more trouble.
Phil would have been a real role model and a real fella you would aspire to become in that regard. That Philip was a senior champion, and when senior champions were worshipped.
Mick Dowling sending his protege into the ring for the 3rd and final round.
My God, he had some wonderful heart. He would train. If you asked him to stand on his head for an hour in the corner, he wouldn't say why. He would just go and do it. And as a result, he had fantastic success.
Yes, for the majority vote, Sutcliffe gets there.
Mick Dowling had won 2 European bronze medals in the late 60s and early 70s, after which Ireland had a pretty lean period in major tournaments. But under Dowling's tutelage, Phil Sutcliffe was about to break that barren spell.
It was a big thing for Irish boxing at that time because I don't think anyone had won anything since Mick Dowling. And him being my coach and then me coming on top at that time, it was kind of it was a double joy for especially for the Drimna Boxing Club.
Philip was really the role model and the bench He set the bench to what we all wanted, and obviously he was an Olympian, and Mick Dowling before him in Drimnagh Boxing Club was an Olympian as well. But when I hit the 16 stage in my life, I said, I'm going to be the next one out of this club to go to the next Olympic Games. And I made a solemn promise to myself that I was going to be the next one.
Major tournaments like the Olympic Games and the European Championships remain the preserve of the elite few. But from the formation of the IABA back in 1911, for the rank-and-file club fighters, the event, year in, year out, is the national championship. Every season, tournaments are staged around the country with seniors and juniors of all weights slugging it out to get to the finals in Dublin.
When we went to Dublin, we were like the little Gabian coming up from the west. We were looking up at Nelson's pillar, you see, that type of thing. And it was frightening, you see. And unless you stretched from above in Dublin, you get nothing. You had to be on the floor flat, and that was it.
When you won something up in Dublin, you were the man. And everybody around our area, around Limerick, of course, would be cheering you on and wishing you the best of luck. And, you know, Sunday morning, you might be doing an hour session at Tren, you get the older guys that come down and they're watching you and excites the situation, you know, and you think you're the be-all and end-all. But, you know, it was fantastic.
One of the extraordinary feats in Irish boxing was the achievement of the three Crystal brothers, Terry, Mel and Joe, who all won senior Irish championships at the National Stadium on the same night, while all three were students at Trinity College.
And I would imagine that's the end of it. Yes, the referee is counting it in the second round. Irish heavyweight Mel Crystal scoring in round 2, referee stopping the contest.
It was special because you had people who are now, you know, orthopedic consultants, veterinary surgeons, people who have doctorates in English, in French, who were all training with you. And while they were there, they were not thinking as academics, they were thinking as athletes, and they gave 100% and loved it.
The university had a great tradition in the sport, and when the Crystal brothers were boxing there, it helped that the club coach was an Olympic silver medalist.
Fred, who won his silver medal in 1956, 20 years later, in 1976, he would skip non-stop for 1 hour. That was a level of fitness which we never experienced. And fortunately, Fred saw in us the willingness to literally sup at his fountain of knowledge and use it in our careers as boxers.
And he says, box on.
The Crystal brothers won their championships during the build-up to the Olympic Games in Moscow in 1980. They could have formed the nucleus of that team.
Well, there's a prospect for you for international boxing. At middleweight, Terry Crystal.
But this was a time when amateur boxing in Ireland was struggling on the international stage. And the Crystals had very different ideas to the hierarchy of the IABA as to the reasons why.
The Irish International Amateur Boxing Team was training in a place called the Orrery Hotel in Drogheda. And the sparring was for the internationals was between themselves, literally. There was no funneling of different sparring partners. At that time, we were told, be in the ordinary hotel on the blank day of blank, otherwise you will not be considered for Moscow. And that was so ridiculous, we decided no.
Jerry Story coached the Irish team that competed at the Munich, Montreal and Moscow Olympics. Munich and Montreal were very much tales of near misses, but the team selected for Moscow in 1980 travelled with real optimism. In its ranks was a 19-year-old from Clones, who 2 years previously had become the youngest fighter ever to win a Commonwealth gold.
Oh, McGuigan has got it, and I don't think you can believe it.
It was an instant love affair, myself and boxing, because I got my dad to bring me to the nearest boxing club, which was 9 miles away, in a place called, the club was called Wattlebridge, ABC. We went out about 5-6 times and nobody turned out, and I was just about to give up, and we saw a guy walking along the road with a rucksack on his back, and he had like a black eye, and I thought, well, we've got a chance here. This is bound to be a boxer. And he was a guy called Little, and I can't remember what his first name was, but I went into the Wattlebridge club and saw the smell of the gym. I just got immediately attracted to it. I said, this is definitely for me.
This is Barry McGuigan boxing at these Olympics, and boxing like a real star. And there's a beautiful right hand, and the referee steps in to give him a count.
I enjoyed woodwork at school, and we used to take our little pieces of work home with us. I remember writing down the little wooden top that I'd made. I remember writing on the bottom of it, you know, Olympic gold medal, Moscow 1980. That's what I want to do.
McGuigan lost a disputed decision to Wilfred Kabunda in the second round, and it pretty much signalled the end of his days in the amateur ranks. Before the year was out, McGuigan had signed on as a professional with Barney Eastwood, and the rest is history.
Zaragoza it is. The Mexican has put the young Irishman, 20-year-old Phil Sutcliffe.
With McGuigan and the rest of the Irish team bowing out in the early rounds, Ireland's hopes of a first Olympic medal since Jim McCord in 1964 rested with Belfast flyweight Hughie Russell.
Hugh Russell will tell the story that in 1980, when he fought in Moscow, rioting stopped on the streets of the New Lodge for 20 minutes when his fights were on.
And the wound were caught there by a good combination from the young Irishman.
I think everybody that goes thinks he can get a medal, otherwise you wouldn't be picked.
3 more minutes to go, and if he wins this one, he's in the medal stage.
You need a wee bit of luck too. Maybe luck's not the right word, because I say to people, I was lucky, and people say, well, you were lucky more than once. So, I mean, fortunate. You need to get the right draw. You need to have the right people around you that can control you and look after you.
He was a bit lucky, but he wins nevertheless. A good win for Hugh Russell, so he's in the medal stage.
I was very fortunate that I brought my club coach. Jerry Story was my club coach, who was also the national coach. So wee small things like that mean a lot to a fighter. So he was able to come with me and be with me the whole time of the Olympics.
Second round. Russell finding this man a bit awkward.
The 70s was a difficult decade for Irish boxing. The regular flow of medals at Olympic Games and European Championships dried up as the powerful nations of amateur boxing became ever more professional and scientific in their approach.
And he's caught, and back he goes into the ropes.
The gulf between what was happening in Ireland and the Eastern Bloc countries in particular was getting wider.
Yes, a unanimous win there for Peter Lesov. So out of the championships goes Hugh Russell.
Hugh, I think at that stage was working at the docks. He was working on, I think it was a shipping company. But I think that was one item that Hugh lost his job over the head of training and boxing, because this is the problems our lad had was trying to get off work.
Like, I had to hold down 2 jobs, train, right, and help my mother get along, because I was the eldest of 10 kids.
Anything we had to do within Ireland on an international base was done purely voluntary, and I think we did very well for that. But when you come up against the Russians or you come up against the Cubans, you know, it's virtually impossible. It was virtually impossible to beat these guys because they were professional amateurs. They were being trained professionally. They were training every day and being paid to do that.
Despite this chronic lack of cash, Ireland's merry band of students, soldiers, bricklayers and pot washers would routinely don the green of the IABA and set off for far-flung rings to take on the best of the Europeans or the Americans.
We boxed in Yankee Stadium in New York first, and then we went on to fight in Boston. Well, I tell you, it was a dream come true for me because I didn't know what it was like to go to Ballybunion, to mind go to America. When you met up with the team that morning, the manager would give you a tracksuit, go in there to the toilet and put it on you, and come back out with it on. And when he counted all the tracksuits, then he was at to give a note. And then when you get off the plane, he count them again to take them back off you again.
You'd go in and you'd look at the opposition, you'd be looking around to see which guy am I fighting, you'd be trying to pick out the guy that's roughly the same size as you. But you see the muscles bulging out of him and you're thinking, geez, he couldn't be the same weight as me. Do you know, but he was, and that's because they had the high performance coaching staff and doing the conditional work and everything with them, do you know, the dietitians and everything, so they were spot on. Whereas we were eating whatever your man put up on the table, and that's the way it was, you know.
We were living in the Stone Age, and actually remember we went to a beautiful place in Kerry to train to acclimatise and everything to get ready for the Korea Olympics. You know, it was, when I think back on it, it was funny, prepare on our own, and the way we've advanced and changed now. Yeah, we were a third world country in that respect. Our top athletes were in America training and preparing with the best in the world, and but the rest of us as boxers, and we always had some very good talented lads, but we weren't getting the proper preparation.
By the time the Olympics were staged in Seoul in 1988, things had begun to change. The Cuban coach Trotman Daly was brought in, and the Irish team had in its ranks two up-and-coming fighters, Wayne McCullough and Michael Carruth.
Trotman wasn't really liked by the guys, you know what I mean? They brought us into training camp down to Kerry, and we stayed in a hotel down Stagford down in Kerry, and we were brought into this 6-8 week cycle of getting ready for these European Championships. And what he done to us was unbelievable. Like, he just killed us, you know what I mean? But it brought us to a level that we felt, you know, we're going to be able to compete with these guys. The Olympics is always the pinnacle. It's always the thing every amateur boxer wants to get to. And if